But I was always one of these kids that could just hear something and play it in any key, and that was sort of my training of the ear. I was one of the most valuable things for me when I was young is being in a church choir where you had this, SATB harmony, and, I was looking at the notes on the page, but I was also, experiencing the harmony between all the different voices, and the organ fascinated me, the church organ.
Really?
Hello.
Dominic, how are you?
How are you? I'm very well. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you so much for your time.
It's all right. It's fine. It's during COVID. Obviously, there was a lot of these sort of interviews happening, and it's always, I've got quite used to doing them on here now. Normally you do them in person, and the in person things are coming back slowly, but it's nice to do this on here again. Where are you? Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Vienna.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I love Vienna.
Oh, do you? Have you been?
Oh, I've played in Vienna many times.
Really?
Yeah. It's we played in, the last time I was there, it was 2018.
Yeah.
Is it the Stadthalle or the
Stadthalle?
Yeah. I played in there many times. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, you have to come back now.
Oh, absolutely.
But about the Zoom interviews, I find it wonderful because I can now speak to people all over the world.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's a wonderful way for artists to talk, and for people to be able to listen, and then you can put it on a podcast, and we can now communicate so much better, I think. So that's great. Yeah,
indeed. I think it's the new form of communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes with music it can be quite difficult in rehearsal situation and things, but for this sort of thing, it's very convenient.
Wonderful. These are the few things that we have to think about that came out of a very tragic situation, but I think we can now start seeing some positives as well. Now tell me, how were you affected by the whole lockdown situation?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously all the live shows just stopped. I was touring in Mexico at the time, and I was doing some shows, and my agent called me from London and said, there's this new thing that's going around and nobody really knows what it is. And we all had to come home, very, very quickly. And then I was home. I came home, and I was home for about a week. And I managed to get a couple of recording sessions done, knowing that, things would be closing very soon. And as soon as we'd finished that, everything just shut down. And it was, I think for the first couple of months, I was quite, I found it quite a relaxing and therapeutic experience because, I'm always on the move and always traveling for shows. Just to have that sense of peace for a couple of months was quite nice. But then I soon got tired of that, and I was ready to start. But I did keep myself busy with various recording projects with various artists. So I did an album with Dame Shirley Bassey through lockdown. So it was actually her final album. So we did all the routining and got the album together, and then we went to record it. So that took a good sort of 7 months to do that. So that filled the time quite nicely. And then when that was over, there was that little window around, I don't know if you remember, in sort of Christmas time last year, things sort of just opened up a little bit,
Yeah.
and then they closed again,
Yeah.
So that was nice that happened.
Mm.
And then obviously into 2021, the live shows started up again. But even now, I mean, it's still, the new variant, and over here, people are a little bit nervous about Christmas and how that's going to affect the entertainment industry. So, I think that it's still a very fragile landscape
Yeah.
for performing.
Did you find when you did the recording in the time of lockdown that it was a bit more relaxed, and that that you had more time, say, to think creatively, or more relaxed in that way than you would have done if it was normal times where you had other things as well?
Definitely, I think that's absolutely right. I think everyone wanted to unite,
Yeah.
and everyone wanted to stick together. I mean, in the recording sessions, when we did like the string section, normally you would have a very close string section, whereas with the social distancing, there were lots of restrictions on the amounts of musicians that we could have in the room, but also like the strings, you couldn't have like two players sat on a desk. It was, one player here, one player there, one player there. So it was really spread out. And the same thing with the singers, like with the choral, if there was like a choir, they couldn't stand as a choir. They had to be all spaced out. So it was more like a collection of soloists rather than a choir. And I think that spacing out really affects not only the sound, but the camaraderie and the ensemble. Because, as a string player, if you're sat here playing and you've got someone right next to you playing, you can feel that energy of the upbeats and the ensemble. Whereas when everyone is spaced out, it can be very difficult. And I think that's happened in live shows as well, like the prom season last year at the Royal Albert Hall. I watched some of that, and it was, the orchestra was spaced out over this massive stage. And I was thinking, how can they hear each other? How can they keep together as an ensemble? It must have been very difficult.
Yeah, but over the lockdown time, I don't know if you know this, but I did a project where I photographed 500 artists in their windows here in Vienna.
Yes.
This is what I actually found, is this camaraderie between them, because I would then post a photograph and somebody else will write, "Oh, that's my friend, I'm so glad you were there," or I would start seeing how some of them that I've already photographed now have an ensemble or formed a duo or something like that. And this I found so beautiful to see how they just now came together, and even the interviews I did over the lockdown time, people were saying the same thing, that it is as if musicians now came together, and collaborated more.
There was a project that I did very early in lockdown, which I can send you, which was I pulled together all of the leading names in the West End of musical theatre, and we collaborated on a song, and I produced a video for YouTube. It was called "We'll Meet Again," and it was based on the Dame Vera Lynn song. And Dame Vera was very, very old at that point, and she sadly passed away about 2 months after we recorded the. She was 103 or something, so she lived to an amazing age. But we put this video together with Alfie Boe and Louise Dearman and all these leading names of the West End, and it came out really well. And then right at the end we were just finishing it off, and a mutual friend got in touch who was like the right-hand lady to Dame Vera Lynn, looked after her business affairs for the last 25 years of her life. And she said, "Oh, I'm seeing Dame Vera tomorrow. Do you want me to get a voice message? Do you want me to ask her to have a message?" So she recorded this message, and she said, "Sending all my love and best wishes to everyone in the theatre industry."
Oh,
And then she finished off. Well, we put it on the front of the song,
yeah.
and then originally Alfie Boe was going to sing the very last line. And then Dame Vera recorded this line that said, "And we will meet again some sunny day." And I just said, I rang up Alfie Boe and I said, "Sorry, Alfie, I've got to put Vera in this last line," because it was just so perfect, you know.
Amazing.
I'll send it to you.
Please, please.
It was, we did it right at the start of lockdown in April last year. And it was exactly what the theatre industry needed at that point, because all the theatres closed with no warning, and nobody can go and see shows. But, you know, furlough wasn't really established then. You know, the government wasn't supporting the arts. I mean, it didn't really support the arts very much at all. But, you know, even then, there wasn't a plan in place. So everyone was just not working. They were sat at home. Producers were sort of saying, "Oh, we're going to terminate the contract," and it was a very dark time for theatre at that point, you know. So it was like a message of goodwill to saying, you know, we will return, you know, theatre will return, because it's such an important part. I think, you know, where you are in Vienna, obviously, you know, the arts are, you know, it's one of the leading cities in the world for the arts. But I think, you know, in London, there's so much emphasis on theatre and on, I suppose that goes back to the culture of, you know, the roots of theatre in London. But theatre, you know, as well as concerts are important here as well. But I think theatre, there's a huge and very loyal theatre community. And that was a massive shock when everything closed. You know?
Yeah.
So,
well, I've also spoken to many artists over the lockdown period, also on Zoom. But that was also in the beginning of 2021, when we were still in the third wave of lockdown. And we talked about this specific thing, and I spoke to actually conductors in the UK as well. And the fact that the arts are not, and artists are not that valued, and that we saw now in this pandemic. And I mean, even here in Vienna, which, like you say, it's arts and culture is a big thing, and it's also a big part of our tourism industry. But yet there were also many artists that were on this brink of going, say, freelance, for example, and then they just missed, you know, out, or just started. And there were very many sad stories that I heard, you know, and but yet what is so amazing is how artists just get themselves out of this, you know, how, like you said, you had this idea, and then everybody pulled together and give this message of hope. And I find this, but I think it's to do with the fact that you are artists, you know, that you can do this switch of getting yourself out of situations.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you know, I think we all need to create. We all need to do something, you know. And I mean, my story is an interesting story in that, you know, I love what I do on the stage and touring and all of that, and working with other artists and orchestras. But I don't come home and feel a need to immediately do it. You know, I'm very happy at home in my studio and making some tea and just watching some films, and that can go on for a long period of time. I don't have a desire. It's very interesting. When I'm not working, I'm not really in that circle. I don't really communicate with the people that I work with. It's very much a different world for me. I have my home world, and then I have my work world, because otherwise it can become very all-encompassing. You know, I think it can become almost you become saturated in that world. You know, and I think it's very healthy to have a a divide. But I completely see what you're saying, that, you know, everyone used their own creativity to come together and unite, which was incredible. I've got a recording studio at home, so I was able to put the whole package together, the audio and the video and everything. And that kept me busy for a couple of weeks as well. So all of these things, you know, planning, ringing people, getting the pieces of audio in. But I remember when we made that, because some people sent in very, you know, lovely pieces of audio in a quiet room, beautifully recorded. And then you had other people that they'd be in their garden with birds in the background and like children playing in the garden next door. And I thought, God, how am I going to treat this audio? How am I going to get rid of this? So I think the birds I left in because they sounded quite sweet.
But this would be, I mean, this is these are the things of this time, you know, that we're going to remember, I think.
Yeah,
so it's good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good thing that it was like that, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I did a lot of stuff from Steinway, because I'm a Steinway artist, and I spent a lot of time at Steinway Hall in London, and they were so kind. Craig Terry, the managing director there, he was, you know, just used them. There's this beautiful room called the mezzanine where there's a Model D Steinway, and it's a beautiful space. And you know, he just let us use that space for live streaming and concerts. And in December last year, about this time last year, I do these things called live piano requests, which is where people can ask me to play something and then I play it back to them. But we did it for charity. So, you know, we raised money. So we tried to raise as much money as possible. We did one last December for a wonderful music charity called Restore the Music. And they are really wonderful. One of my favorite charities, actually, because they, you know, they spend the money on things that are really needed in schools, you know, musical instruments, resources. And we raised over £20,000 in an hour for this charity. And, you know, it just shows what, you know, the power of live streaming if you're doing it for a good cause. I think that was, you know, that's really important. And I really admire the people that, you know, spread as much joy as possible, you know, during lockdown. I think that was, you know, that was very important, because a lot of people, particularly in the arts, they lost their way. And I think that was because they relied so much on, you know, today I've got a show, today I've got a rehearsal, then I need to travel here and travel there. And I think if that is all you know, and then that stops, you know, it's that's a real shock, you know. Particularly people with families to support, you know, it was a very, very difficult time all over the world, I think, you know, for our industry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even countries like America, for example, that don't have any support from the state, you know, their musicians also, you know, had a difficult time, I think. Well, that I think I know from speaking to many. But you're talking about the Steinway now, and I saw on Instagram you have this beautiful piano that you bought.
I do.
Tell me the story about this piano.
Well, Steinway and I go back about 10 years. I was asked to play at an event in London, and it was for the royal wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. And it was at Lancaster House, and they asked me to come and play some songs, some music, while the gathering was taking place. And they had this beautiful Steinway Model D, their concert grand piano. And of course I played them before, you know, I went to the Royal College of Music, and there are a lot of Steinways. But this one in particular was really quite special to play. It was an amazing piano to play. And I met the people from Steinway that were there at the time, and one of them, his name was Ulrich Gerhardt, who is one of the world's finest piano technicians. You know, he prepares pianos for festivals all over the world, for all the most wonderful pianists, Ashkenazi, Marta Argerich, Lang, the list goes on. And he was there, and we started talking, and he said, Dominic, I really like your tone, and I like your playing. And I said, well, never mind that, I really like your pianos, So he said, would you come down to Steinway Hall in Marylebone Lane in London, which is where Steinway is? And I did just that, and I met everyone, and our relationship just went from strength to strength. I have a piano duo called the Piano Brothers as well, and the Piano Brothers is a that's probably my main live show that I do worldwide, mainly in Asia. Most of our shows are in Southeast Asia, Singapore, those sort of places. And Steinway really supported us from the very beginning. We have two pianos when we play, like interlocking, and all the repertoire is for two pianos. So whilst we were rehearsing our Piano Brothers show in the basement of Steinway, there was an upright piano, a Model V, and I always thought it looked quite sad. I always felt sorry for it, because I thought, because everywhere else there's these big black, the big pianos, concert grounds, and then there was this little upright in the corner. And I thought, I'm going to use this piano, and I started doing some practicing on there and playing and this sort of thing. And it just sat there, and the years went by, and every time I went to Steinway, I sort of went in and had a little play and had a little chat to it. I talked to my piano, as you see, and it was that was really, really lovely. And then just before COVID, Craig Terry called me, and he said, "Look, there's the opportunity. This piano's come up. What do you think?" Sort of thing. And he gave me an amazing price that I couldn't refuse, and now it's here in my house.
I saw the picture on Instagram. It's fascinating. Yeah.
And I sort of, before it arrived, I said to the there's a department that not refurbished, but they service the pianos and they look at it. And I said, look, before it comes to me, can you just give it? Can you have a look at it? So they repolished it and made the action as best as it could be, and now it's ended up here with me, which is wonderful.
A little orphan piano.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really lovely because where I've got it in my room here, it's like a wooden floor and it's a nice acoustic. When it was at Steinway, it was in a very dry room with carpet, so you couldn't really hear the full acoustic of what the piano sounded like. So now that it's here, it's I'm pleased that it's finally made its way to me.
Yeah, but I think it's beautiful. I can almost see your relationship with this little piano that you ever have.
No, it's lovely. But no, they've been wonderful. I mean, Steinway. I mean, I play other pianos as well, but I think whenever I get the choice, I would always play a Steinway because, I've been many times to the factory in Hamburg, and the process of building these pianos is absolutely fascinating. In fact, Elwin is the other pianist in the Piano Brothers, and he lives in Asia. And very near the beginning of our relationship with Steinway, they were making a film of the making of a Model B piano, which is a slightly smaller piano, in the Hamburg factory. And the whole film lasted only 2.5 minutes. It was like the process of the making of this piano. And they said, we need some music. Can you compose something for us? So we composed this piece, which we play in all of our live shows, and it's called Ballad for Steinway. And the video is on YouTube, and it's just watching these pianos being made from the wood being rolled into the factory, all through the different stages, and then it's ready. It goes on to whoever wants to get it.
I think also I find it so fascinating that they also, I saw a few of the videos. It would be interesting to know which one it is that you composed the music to. You say it's just 2.5 minutes long. I'll go and have
a look. Yeah, if you type in Ballad for Steinway into YouTube, it will come up. And yeah, it was really lovely to do that because it gave us such an insight. And whenever we're there, we always go and play. We did a thing called Life on the Factory Floor. We were passing through Hamburg. We were only there for 2 days doing a concert. And we went to Steinway Hall. And they just finished a piano. It just finished being built that morning, and the action had been released, and it was ready to use. And I said, "Look, we're here. Do you want us to do anything?" So they gathered all of the factory staff together, hundreds of people from everywhere at lunchtime, and we just sat down and gave a little impromptu recital for all of the craftspeople, because it's not, with pianos, and particularly pianos like that, it's not just the players that should get the credit. It's these craftspeople that spend years perfecting their craft, and that's a very important part of it.
I've spoken to two violin makers as well. I would love to speak to somebody at Steinway as well to get an insight about what the making of the piano is, because when you start talking about the instrument makers, also you hear a different story, and you understand why what is so important for an artist to have the best quality and the best instrument.
Absolutely, and I think some pianos speak to different people, and I'm sure this is the same of all instruments. You know, it's a bit like my little piano there. It's whenever I go and do a big show or a big concert with an orchestra or whatever, I select the piano. I go to Steinway Hall and I work with Ulrich, who's the gentleman that I told you about before, and we work together selecting the piano. And he knows my style of playing, he knows Elwin's style of playing, and he knows the style of playing of all the players that regularly, perform on these pianos. There's a fleet of maybe 12 pianos, 10 to 12 pianos, and they're all out at the proms and the Leeds piano competition and all of these places around the UK. And he selects the right piano, because, if you were doing a concert in a big concert hall and it's a big concerto and an orchestra, at the end of the day you need a piano that is loud enough to fill the space. Whereas if you're in a studio, you might be playing the same concerto, but the microphones are just here, So it doesn't need to project like it does in the Royal Albert Hall or concert venues like that, So I find that fascinating, how the timbre of the instruments can actually change to suit the environment that it's being used in.
And if you're not a musician, you just think, well, there's a piano. You don't realize that it has this personal, you have to have this personal almost relationship with the instrument.
Yeah. And it is personality. We call it personality. Each piano has its own personality. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, just by what the violin makers tell me also, I think it's wonderful that it really is like that. Now, I also saw another picture. I stalked your Instagram, but it's so wonderful that you share all this. But you have a picture there where you were very young, and you are also then already recording and doing your thing. What age were you when you started playing the piano?
Oh, I was very young. I mean, both my parents have been in the music industry for many, many years, and I sort of grew up in that environment, really. So I started playing properly around sort of 5 or 6, but I didn't start reading music and learning the piano properly, in terms of the normal route of learning, until I was maybe sort of 10, 11. So quite late, really. But I was always one of these kids that could just hear something and play it in any key, and that was sort of my training of the ear. I was in one of the most valuable things for me when I was young is being in a church choir, where you had this, SATB harmony, and I was looking at the notes on the page, but I was also experiencing the harmony between all the different voices, and the organ fascinated me, the church organ,
Really?
Yeah, and I learned organ for many years, and I think that having that experience in those other fields as well as just the piano, it sort of makes your experience more rounded, I think, musically. But yeah, yes, I mean, I sort of learned, and I tried different things up until the age of maybe 10 or 11, maybe a little bit older actually. And then when I was about 12 or 13, I changed college. I went to a different school, and there I had a teacher that was far more strict, and he was, it had to be done in a very proper classical approach. And that was a fantastic experience because it allowed me to realize, how I needed to harness my technique to play the certain pieces that I wanted to play. And he then taught me for the next 5 years until I was 18, which then prepared me to go on to the Royal College of Music, which is where I did my degree. And I always had this fascination when I was training. I loved the classical repertoire, and I still do. I play a lot of Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, and I still enjoy the romantic Russian repertoire. But I also have a love for 20th century American music, sort of Gershwin and Irving Berlin, and what I would call the American songbook. Gershwin's music fascinates me. I mean, Gershwin is the perfect crossover between classical and jazz and musical theatre. And he was another one that sort of just moved around these different genres, So I love that equally as well. So I guess you could say that my training was very diverse and very eclectic across different genres. It wasn't just classical piano, it was choirs and organ and musical theatre and jazz, and I think now in the job that I do now, I have to use all of these things. Because sometimes you may turn up to a recording session and they say, right, it's a string quartet, you need to sight read this. And then the next day you might be playing in Les Miserables and, or Phantom of the Opera, and then the next day you might be doing a pop song. So it's very important, I think, as a musician now, to be as versatile as possible.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of young people, certainly that I found when I was at college, that they focus all of their time on classical music, but they maybe alienate some of the other genres, which I think for them could present a problem after they graduate, because you've got to be employable. You've got to go and play for a ballet class or go and play for, a pop singer or a musical theatre singer. And I think just having a knowledge of as many different genres as possible is very important, especially in those teenage years, to be exposed to that.
But what is so interesting now that you say that you started off not reading music, just by ear. And, I actually spoke to the pianist Charlie Albright in America, and he said the same thing. And while you were speaking, he has the same type of idea of really being free in what you play and not just classical music. And he plays all the genres as well. Do you perhaps think that it could be the fact that you had that freedom before you started reading music, that you learned by ear, and that gave you sort of this courage or this way of looking at music as that it should not be boxed into I only play this or I only play that?
Yes, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think the freedom of having that exposure to music, and you have to like the genres. I think, if you listen to a piece and you don't particularly like it, you're not going to relate to it. I think if you listen to, I grew up listening to pop music, to musical theatre. I mean, when I first heard Les Miserables for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, I've just discovered this new genre, and then I listened to West Side Story, and then I listened to Phantom of the Opera, and all these old classic musicals from years ago that were all influenced by the people that came before. I mean, if you listen to some of the Rodgers and Hammerstein scores, like The Sound of Music and Carousel and South Pacific, they all come from a classical place. They're all based on a classical foundation. And, these composers are essentially using their medium, using their composition to storytell through music. And it's the same with opera, So, yeah, I think being exposed to as many genres as possible is really important. Even now, I listen to pop songs, I used to listen to a lot of, I still do. I love Elton John, the Beatles, obviously, Fleetwood Mac. And I think, I guess it is a little unique to have a knowledge of such a wide variety of music. But I think when you go to play that music, so if I was going to sit down and play some Beethoven, you have to switch into that chapter in your mind. It's like, right, we're now playing classical music. Whereas if you're going to play, I don't know, if you're playing for a jazz singer and they're singing Misty or something, it's a different thing. You're following the singer, you're very free. So I think, what Charlie said is absolutely right. I think that, and look, people that want to specialize in one genre, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think they're wrong at all. That's what they've chosen to do. But I think even if you don't play other styles of music, I think it's important to be aware of them and what they sound like, So, and I started reading music very late, through the choir I read music, but I didn't actually sit down and play until I was sort of 9 or 10, about 9, which is quite late, really. If you started playing at 5, then you're not looking at the score until 9, but I used to go to church on a Sunday, and I used to come back and I used to just play the hymn, just play it, and I never played it before, and I don't know, I just had this ability to do that. I never question it, and I still don't, because I feel that it comes very it's almost like inspiration. It just comes and it happens. And I think sometimes if you analyze things like that, it can be destructive. You just have to let it flow.
And also, I think are you a perfectionist?
Yes, I think so. I think I am. Very much more so with my own things. With anybody else's, like if I'm teaching someone and they want to interpret it in something that I wouldn't necessarily do, but something in their own style, then I generally, as long as they're interpreting it in a way that is acceptable, then I let them put their stamp on it. But with me, I'm very very tough on myself. I mean, I do come away from shows sometimes and I think, that was good, and that's the best I could have played it, but that happens maybe once or twice a year,
Really?
out of. I mean, I do over 100 concerts a year, so once or twice in those 100 concerts. I mean, the other show, most of the shows are. That's fine, great. Let's do the next one. That's my normal response. And then occasionally you just come away and thinking, I'm not enough coffee today.
But the interesting thing is, I always think the audience don't even realize when you do something that
they don't. And that's another thing that like with people that come and see my shows that know me and really know what I play and the way that I play. I really encourage them to give critical feedback, because I love critical feedback.
Really?
I thrive on being criticised.
Really?
I much prefer to be criticised than being told that was really good. But I think that comes from, I think that's because I feel that I'm very secure in my playing. So, I don't have any insecurities at all about my playing. And that means that I can take that criticism and then think, right, that was an interesting comment. How can I relate that to what I'm doing? Sometimes I ignore it, because I don't feel that it's relevant at the time. Other times I will listen to it and think, I always have to put myself in the shoes of the person. So are they a musician? Are they a punter? Where were they sitting in the theatre? Were they with friends? Were they drinking wine? All of these things matter.
Yeah.
Because that will influence their feedback. Because if you're sitting in a very formal setting and everyone's dressed smartly, you're immediately in that formal sense of, very conventional concert going. Whereas if you're going to a jazz bar and everyone's got a glass of wine and everyone's a bit, that's a different feeling. It's all about the atmosphere of the room and it's, and that sort of thing. So, I always like to have that feedback. And I do watch footage back of myself and try and improve on. I don't try and improve. I try and do. It's like a new slate. Like every time, there are pieces that I've performed in every concert I've ever done, and when I come to it the next time, it's almost like you're telling the story, but no one's ever heard this story before. It's like I've heard it before, but I've still got to make it as interesting as possible for everyone that's here. So that's my philosophy, really.
Okay.
And that's what that's what keeps it fresh, I think. And the same when I'm doing my piano duo. I'll be performing on stage one night, and Elwyn might play something differently, and that makes it really interesting for me because it's like, oh, he's doing this. Maybe I should do this. And it's done on the spot. Not so much that it's like, okay, we're not together anymore, but just a little bit, so that it's like a different flavour or a different colour, So I think you're always learning, and I always try to inspire others. That's my sort of primary goal. If someone comes to my show and I play something and they say, oh, that's made me, I'm going to get the sheet music for that and I'm going to learn it, then that really, that's what makes me feel good.
Yeah. Do you get nervous before a performance?
No, not really.
Really?
Not really. No, not. I used to. I used to when I was younger, but I think you have to normalize in order to feel very. For me, everyone has their own approach to this, I know, but for me, I said to myself, right, performing on a stage in front of however many people needs to be as normal as going to the shop and picking up the milk. And I've got to get to a place where it feels as normal as that. And it does. And the only time I get slightly nervous is if I'm accompanying someone and we could have done with a bit more rehearsal time. That's the only time. Because, I don't get nervous for me, I get nervous for them because, I don't want to mess up the performance for them, And I think accompanying is one of my favorite things to do because, in a way, it's more enjoyable than being a soloist because you can be there. I do a lot of work with a tenor called Jonathan Antoine, and he's wonderful, a wonderful talent. And I love playing for him because he's so musical. He breathes with the music. It's like this sort of, we're on this little river, and it's a joy. And he does it differently every night, which means that you can't relax because he might want to take more time. And that's also very enjoyable as well, doing that sort of thing. But sorry.
No, you're not the first pianist who tell me that this accompaniment is that you like that, because I've heard this quite a few times already, that with a singer and that it's this, and I've seen many, when I went to Liederabend, for example, I could see the chemistry. I find it fascinating, the chemistry between the pianist and the singer, because it's almost as if they look at each other and there's something, there's this.
There's definitely an energy between,
definitely,
But I think that I think if you're a soloist and you then go and accompany someone, you have to embrace a very different set of rules because you're no longer a soloist. You are there for one reason, and that reason is to facilitate the soloist. You're there to support them. It's almost like you're a blanket, a foundation, so they will never fall. Because you'll be there for them, and that's the way that I always approach accompanying. And there might be a bit where there might be a section of music where the soloist doesn't sing, and then you can become the string section or become the woodwind solo. But then the soloist comes back in, and you pull the dynamic back, and it's a very, very different art to playing solo. But a lot of people ask me to teach them. I do give lessons, but I'm very cautious about the people that I coach or mentor, because my playing is so stylized. It's very it's sort of become very a certain color over the years, and I always say to people, if you want to learn to play in my style, then I will teach you. But like, if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, my son is taking grade 5, can you help him play?" I'm not the right teacher for that, because my approach is so far buried, in my style. Like, for example, most piano players in the world will probably use fingering for a C major scale, 1, 2, 3, then the thumb would go under, and then you'd finish the scale. My fingering for scale is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's so I've developed my own styles which feel comfortable for me, but I wouldn't want to go and teach a young pianist or a pianist that's starting out the wrong rules, because it's
But I love this, that you made up your own rule.
yeah. Well, I think that you I think sometimes you listen to other musicians, particularly guitarists like Brian May of Queen and Jeff Beck, and you think they've sort of developed their own sound. And I would like to think that when I have a great piano on stage with me, because that's the other thing about piano players. Every other instrumentalist, they would bring their own harp, they would bring their own flute, they would bring their own violin, their own cello. Generally speaking, most of the time, we have to play what's there. Most of the time. Occasionally, I can say, right, I'm doing this show, there's a budget to hire a piano, and I'll use my favorite piano from Steinway or whatever, and then it will get brought to me. But most of the time, if I'm accompanying someone or whatever, you have to play what's there, and you have to instantly adapt your playing to that piano. Not only the piano, the acoustic of the hall, the proximity with the soloist. So you're always learning. This is the thing about this field. And this is like what you were saying earlier about people just think it's a piano. It's when people go to a concert, they think, oh, they're just doing another concert, but it's not. It's like it might be a new hall. It might be played this piano before, and they might be working with a new soloist. So all these energies and relationships are constantly, everyone is learning something.
Yeah, but this is what I think sometimes is that distance between the artist and the public. It's not, we hear the music, and I'm not a musician, so for me, all this information is always so interesting. But I think there's these little things that people dress up, go to the concert hall, they see the artists on the stage, you know, all dressed up and shiny piano. But there's this path before, there's this whole unseen part that the audience never know about. So I think also when we know more, it would also bring a different appreciation, you know, because if you understand, like this, for example, if you tell about the piano, now you understand. So every time artists tell me these things, I look at it in a different way. You know, I listen to the music in a different way. So I think it's so important, you know, to talk about this. But now, I want to ask you, do you have little rituals before you perform?
Rituals. I think it's fair to say that on a show day, you know, from the moment you wake up, you know, even if the show is in the evening, there's still that little thing in the back of your mind saying you've got a show tonight. Now, I tend to be very relaxed before shows. It's sort of, you know, I don't do, during the day I'm relaxed before a show. When I get to the venue, first thing I do is go to the stage, try the piano, say hello to everyone. That's one of the things that I always make sure I do, is that I say hello to all the crew members, everyone backstage. Just to, you know, because you might need to speak to them later in the day, you know, it's good to have that relationship going. So I spend a good sort of 20 minutes, half an hour going around sort of saying hello to everyone in whatever venue I'm playing in. Once that's done, I go and organise my dressing room, and I don't usually spend a lot of time in there, apart from immediately before the performance. So once all that's done and I'm sound checked, I generally go out and get some food or whatever, come back. But then I do have some quiet time. I just have maybe 45 minutes, half an hour to 45 minutes, not really even thinking about the show, just being out of the energy of everyone else.
Oh, yeah.
Because you know, occasionally someone will knock on the door and say, oh, do you need anything? And that's fine. But what you don't want to be doing is getting into conversations with people, because it just distracts your flow a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So I try and just, you know, I might even just be on my phone in my room, you know, checking social media or whatever, but you're in control. You know, you haven't got somebody talking to you, you're in control. So, yeah, I just like to have that time on my own before a show. Yeah, I mean, apart from that, I don't really warm up too much. I don't like playing too much on the show day. Occasionally I'll just play for 10 minutes because I think that your energy... I eat a lot on show days.
Really?
Because, I do eat. I eat a lot before shows and afterwards. But yeah, you know, I think that a lot of people fall, it's not a trap, but they sort of like to do a lot of warming up and practicing and play through the whole piece. And that's great. You know, if that works for you, that's great. But you've got to think all of those calories are being burned and you can't get those back for the evening, you know. You should always perform on nutrition and not on nervous energy. You know, you should perform on, you know, so you feel there and you think, right, yeah, I've had my coffee, I've had my pasta, and I'm ready to go. You know, just like before you would run a race or something. I mean, because my shows, you know, I can be on stage sometimes for 3 hours, you know, and you're constantly playing for those 3 hours, everything from memory, and you're talking and you've got to introduce everything and you've got to remember all these facts, and you've got to feel you would get burnt out if you didn't if you didn't prepare yourself properly for that length of time, you know, especially if you've got to then do the next day and the next day and the next day. So but yeah, rituals, I you know, I just try and be really relaxed, really, and just chilled out. I think you've got to you can't let any day-to-day problems enter your mind while you're focusing on the show. You know, get the show done and then focus on that, you know.
And then afterwards, winding down.
So I tend...
drink beer or wine?
Oh gosh. Sometimes neither. I mean, coffee is my
Oh, really?
guilty pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I drink a lot of coffee. But after shows, if I'm singing, because I sing as well, so if I'm doing a
Oh,
show
okay.
if I'm doing a show that involves singing, and I've got another show the other day, I generally won't drink anything.
Okay.
But if I'm just playing, I'll go back to my dressing room. I'll get changed out of my show clothes straight away, and then leave, and then maybe have a beer or a glass of
Yeah.
wine. But only one.
Oh, really? Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's
I
that
don't.
winding down that everybody said afterwards, that you need, because there's all this adrenaline, and then you just have to.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very good at just switching it off like that. I mean,
Really?
yeah. I mean, yes, I would say so. I mean, I come back and just sort of go to bed, and it's
Ah,
because
okay.
it's I've always had that detach. Like if you're playing,
Oh,
it's like
okay.
it's the audience are way over there, and it's I mean it depends on the show. It really depends on the show. But yes, I think that winding down is important. But if you've got a show the next day, that whole routine is going to start again. And generally, when I'm touring, you might do 5 shows in different locations back to back. I mean, when we're doing the Elvis tour, we would, when I was in Vienna actually, we would come off stage in Vienna, and then 9 o'clock the next morning, you've got to be in Sweden ready for rehearsal.
Yeah.
So, and then you do the show in Sweden, and then the next day you've got to be in Norway, and then the next day you've got to be in Denmark, and so it's constant.
Yeah.
And then after those tours, you really are tired because you're playing every night, and then you finish. Yeah.
It's that's also something we don't realize, that it's that way of doing these tours. It's really tiring. It's not just the playing; it's that all the other things that go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's part of it. I think the playing is important, but I think what some musicians fail to realize nowadays is that the playing is important, but so is taking care of your logistics and your travel and your accounts and your clothes and your social media. All of that is part of the job. I think a lot of people see, playing is the main thing and everything else goes around it, and that can sometimes be a chore, like they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think you can think about it that way, certainly not for me. To me, checking the flights and the travel information is just as important as playing the show. Everything is part of the whole package, and that's the way you're organised, because otherwise you'd be flying somewhere and it would go wrong, that you'd get to an airport and there'd be nobody there to pick you up. And I mean, luckily I've got people that do all of that sort of stuff for me, but I still like to be involved and know what the itinerary is and all of that sort of thing. So that's always a very important part of it, but yeah, so I don't. Yeah, I mean that's I think that would be a good piece of advice for young people starting out, just to embrace the whole package, not just the performance.
Yeah, well, one musician also said that the same thing, and said that it's the emails that you write that you don't want to write, but that's also the important part, that you have to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that times are changing. Social media is your shop front. It's almost like your window to the outside world, and there are days when I wake up and think, oh God, I don't want to do anything today. But if you've got a show coming up, it's your duty to make sure that people know about it, and talking to the camera as well is something else that I think that a lot of performers could do a lot more of, because it's very important to talk between pieces and to be a relatable presence to the audience.
Exactly.
And that, obviously in the show you would do that, but it's very important to pick up your phone and say, right, hey folks, here we are today and we're in rehearsal and this is what's happening. This is our lead violinist. And, because people want to, like you were saying earlier about people don't know what goes on. People want to see that, So that's very important.
Well, this is what also many conductors have said over these interviews that I do, that they say that they actually love to talk to the people, and even in a concert hall, but that to have that connection. And I think it is so important, that it's breaking away from this very strict, no speaking, just playing. For people like me, for example, who don't have a music knowledge, I find it wonderful if I can hear something, even if it's just the story about the piece, even if it's not even the detail, you just want to hear something that would trigger the mind to carry on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's I think it's very, very, very important to have that all-encompassing feel. With what you're doing, that's very, very important.
Dominic, do you do your own styling?
Styling? Oh gosh, well, yes. I mean, I do. Really? I mean, it depends on the show. I think sometimes, depending on the show, if you've got if you're doing a big show with lots of people or an orchestra or whatever, sometimes there'll be stylists there. But when we do big tours, we take stylists and that sort of thing. But for one-off shows, I generally bring my hair products and bring my own clothes.
Yeah, because you also have to have the freedom of movement, isn't it, while you're playing?
Yeah. I mean, that's very important, actually. I always have my shirts untucked and open collar. I never wear a bow tie or a tie or anything because I think you've got to be free. You've got to be free to move. As you want to. That's very important. One of the most important things, actually, because the last thing you want is to feel uncomfortable if you're playing. So
but that's great. But tell me, just the last question: what is your wish for now?
My wish for now is to inspire. Is to inspire as many people with music as possible, and allow them to realise that music is an international language that unites everyone. Everyone can respond to that emotion, that music gives, and I think that there are no barriers anywhere in the world. You can listen to a concert and you will have an emotional response to that music. And I think that's something that the new generation of young people need to learn, because they're growing up right now in a world of social media and with their phones, which is fine and it has its uses and it can be very productive at times, but I think it's dangerous to do that at the expense of not being aware of creativity that music can bring, and not just music. Art in its purest form, dance, performing arts, acting. These are all creative things that I feel need to be championed as we move forward. Very, very important. And this is why when I see charities sort of putting all this money into, into schools, and I've seen the before and after. I've seen what the schools were like before. And I've seen what the schools were like after they've received this funding. The instruments are there, the staff are there, and the resources are there. And 2 years later, these kids that have never played a musical instrument are, playing and working together in a creative environment. And, that is the most fulfilling thing for me, more so than my own performances or anything. That brings me more joy than anything else, really.
Well, I am so happy that you say that, because this is also my wish, that schools can make art as an important subject as maths and science. That every school and every child in the world has the possibility to to do a music, not just music, but like you say, any form of art, because I think the art education is so important.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that there's enough of us to champion it. You know, there's enough of us around to say this is important, and I think it will take time. It will, particularly at the moment where the media is just completely saturated by, you know, COVID and everything. But I think there will come a time of balance again. You know, where we can really push forward and you know, because it's so reassuring to see young people being so passionate about the climate movement, which is so important. And I think, you know, young people have really got on board with that, you know, and I think now the arts needs to follow in the same way, you know.
What is so interesting is I speak to also many African singers and in South Africa as well, and they all say the same thing. They say they started in a choir, and from there it happened for them. And in this choir was almost their way of having a better life, or you know, focusing on other things. And you think you don't even need an instrument to sing in a choir because you have it already. You know, you have your voice already. So and just that example for me is also to show that, you know, you don't need a lot of resources really. You need just the voice and to be able to sing.
Absolutely.
But Dominic, this was so lovely to talk to you. I can talk to you for hours. You are such an interesting person, and you have so many interesting things to say.
Thank you so much for today.
Okay, Dominic.
And we'll keep in touch, all right?
Yes, definitely. Have a lovely day.
And you as well.
When you come to Vienna, let me know that we can go for a coffee.
Have a coffee. Yeah, that would be lovely. That would be lovely.
Okay.
All right, take care. See you later.
Thank you.